Warning: some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Black Ram 313, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, brother. Another day in Chicago. The sun is heading down and feeling good, man. Pretty good day.
Yeah. Now, so first I want to ask you about your name, Black Ram 313. Is 313 an area code?
Everybody thinks that that's for Detroit. And actually, what happens is when you are picking a username on YouTube, I wanted it just to be Black Ram, but Black Ram was taken. Then I tried a couple of other variations of Black Ram, and that was taken. So it auto-generated Black Ram 313 for me, and I kept it. The Black Ram was mine, but the 313 was YouTube's idea.
That's great. That's great. Sometimes the recognizable aspects of our persona are not by choice. They're just what they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm a musician. You asked, or you said I was a musician. Yes, I am a musician, guilty as charged. And a number of the folks that I've interviewed on this series have been musicians. And I've interviewed some quite notable jazz musicians in particular and trombonists. And one thing that was similar was when I asked them, why did you choose trombone? Tell me something about, how that occurred. And it was always something like, it was the only thing left over. They wouldn't let me do the thing I really wanted to do.
It just kind of worked out for them.
And it just worked out that way. And, and the folks that I'm talking about, these are world-class musicians. And so, hey, sometimes that's just how it goes. So anyhow, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and getting involved in the space, this sort of men's space, black men's space on YouTube in particular, and what got you into that, and maybe a bit of a sort of origin story as far as deciding to make the kind of content that you make?
Yeah, it's a lot of different factors that led up to it in my personal life before YouTube, of course. One of the things that happened, I recall a story where like an older brother of mine, but not biologically, just a brother in the neighborhood who kind of like looked after me a little bit. And he was telling a group of people how much he loves his girlfriend and how much his girlfriend loves him. Now, this was a guy that was completely thugged out, and he was saying that his girlfriend would never ever cheat on him. And people started looking around like, what's wrong with this guy? He's delusional. Because unbeknownst to him, but we all knew that she was the type to cheat on him, and she actually was, but nobody had a heart to tell him because he had pretty much a temper and are prone to violence. And I realized that men are not really aware of the nature of the women that they're surrounded with. And from that point, I decided to study female nature. This before YouTube was ever popular. I didn't know anything about male space or anything about female nature in the community. I just started paying attention myself and became keenly aware of the dark side of female nature. So fast forward to about 2010, 2011, I started watching Manosphere content. Ran into a guy by the name of Thug Titian Wisdom, some MGTOW community, Barbarossa, Stardust, Idigon Forest, Last Crucible, and quite a few others, Rick Scorpio. And I started listening to their content and it resonated with me. I'm like, wow, we have the same experiences. So this is not an isolated incident. This is not just a Chicago, my neighborhood thing. This is pretty much universal. And then it just was impressed upon me that, hey, I have a lot that I want to say. I was one of those guys that was always in the comment section with something to say. This is when, this was before AdSense revenue. This was before super chats. This was when just YouTube was just pure, organic, and just raw. It wasn't much censorship. You could say what you want to say. And I would just have a lengthy time in people's comment section. And I said, you know what, let me try to do this on a video. And then I uploaded a video called Women Want Chaos. This was in May of 2013, my very first video on YouTube ever. And it did pretty well. I think it got like 1,000 views in a couple of months, which at that time on YouTube was a lot, because it wasn't like it is today, where somebody can do a video and get 100,000 views in a couple of hours. So to get 1,000 views in close to a month period of time was a lot for me. Anybody on YouTube, I wouldn't say it was viral at the time, but it was just a video that did pretty well. And from there, the MGTOW community started to notice me, and I got more subscribers, and I talked more about those issues of men doing their separate thing away from and outside of relationships, men being more, how can I say, autonomous when it comes to relationships and not having that need for relationships. But I was never the type of guy that would swear off relationships. So I didn't quite fit in with the MGTOW. I don't want to say the name because that's one of those words that's demonetized on YouTube. So I want to be very aware if you monetize the video. But anyway, so everything in that community didn't fit with me very well. And that's when I somewhat created my own brand, because I believe in dealing with the opposite gender. It's just, how are you doing it? Are you doing it in a more efficient and sufficient way? So it wasn't necessarily a break per se from that, but I never said that I never wanted to deal with women. So I never swore. I've never wanted to be a monk, never wanted to be on an island by myself. Always enjoyed women, always have, always will, and always dealt with women and always will deal with women. So that's pretty much, in short, my journey to this YouTube space. And not the most popular guy in the YouTube space, but I've been here a long time, so I know a lot of history about the Manosphere in general, because I was here before the so-called Black Manosphere was actually even called the Black Manosphere. I was here before there was a such thing as a space called the Black Manosphere, when you had guys like a Rick Scorpio, Thug Titian Wisdom, and a few others like Adigon Force and the Last Crucible. We didn't call ourselves, a guy named Soul and Black. They didn't call themselves Black Manosphere. It just was Black men voicing their opinion about Black women and Black relationships. And then, of course, as the space grew, then the coin, the phrase got turned, the coin called the Black Manosphere. But of course, that wasn't the inception, but that was just pretty much launched it somewhat into popularity on YouTube. But I was there before it was even called that.
Right. So there's all kinds of different kind of content in the Black Manosphere. It's certainly not monolithic, and the folks that are in the space are not in lockstep.
Absolutely.
On issues. There's a diversity of opinions, a diversity of political perspectives. There's all kinds of different content. But one way that seems that the sort of detractors of the Black Manosphere will do is to sort of suggest that it's all the same stuff. It's a bunch of woman bashing. It's a bunch of, angry men. It's a bunch of incels that are upset and, disappointed that they couldn't get the girl they wanted. And now they're going to try to create, some sort of dynamic where they can shame the women that they wanted into giving them a shot, all of this kind of stuff. And though I would say that perhaps what goes on in the space is not always productive, I would also say that I think it is very much needed. And, I'm 47, and the last couple years have been the only time in my life the only time in my life where I was able to have sort of meaningful conversations with folks that had had a lot of the same kind of experiences, especially with respect to relationships, and where I stopped feeling quite so much like a like an alien or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of
Thanks for watching my video so far. There's all kinds of ways that you can support below. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Also, become a channel member where you'll get access to all of the archived videos. Now, back to the video.
Say, what is it? Gaslighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you have certain experiences, you try to share aspects of those experiences to the wrong person,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll either pretend as though, oh, you must be the only one. Something must be wrong with the way you're doing this, or there's something wrong with you because you're pointing out, an obvious issue with the way that things are being done, right? And so, what are your thoughts on the space? It seems that you must believe it to be a positive thing, to be in the space this long.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you, and why do you think it's necessary? Why do you think it's necessary for men?
Well, the space has kind of left off of its original meaning and intent. I'll talk about that in a second. But the space is still valuable because it's bringing awareness to men about relationships and female nature, allowing men to understand that they are not alone in their experiences. I would have men call, either message me or in the comment section say all the time, like, wow, I didn't know other people were going through this exact same thing. It's like we're all telling the same story. And if we all telling the same story from all different parts of the country, then that experience has to be valid. The space mainly was once upon a time about improving the male mind, improving our circumstances in life. But now it's become more about infighting, gossip, mud throwing, this beef, that beef, controversy. It sells. I understand that, but it's become more of a space to not help men, but to almost like a tabloid almost. I remember a time where it was just about the content itself. The presentation wasn't the point. It was what you were saying. People really keyed in on how well you articulated your points. Now it's just it's a show. It's all about entertainment now. And not that that's always a bad thing. Sometimes that's a great way to get the message across. But in my opinion, it's become too much of a clown show, too much of, this guy beefing with that guy. And I've had my disagreements, but what I've done is try to carry myself with a certain amount of integrity and respect. So if I have a disagreement with you, I'm going to speak on that disagreement without being disrespectful, and then I'm going to back away. I've only had really like one beef on YouTube, and I think I handled it in a great way. I made a couple of videos that were maybe 2 videos that were like maybe 15 minutes all together, and just to talk about the subject that we disagreed on. That was it. So a lot of guys don't take shots at me because I don't really do beefs like that, and I've kind of separated myself from the space and all of the mud throwing, and I kind of gotten my own lane. Like I'm not red pill. You got the blue pill, you got the red pill, but I have my own brand, which is called the real pill, which is actually different from red pill. And it's kind of like a variation, or how can I say it, an improvement, in my opinion, on the black and the red pill together. It pretty much just cut everything down to the bare bones. It's kind of explicit, so I don't want to really say it on the YouTube air. But because the real pill is pretty explicit. It's not too many ways I can articulate it without being explicit. But anyway, so in my opinion of myself, so to speak, I've evolved myself in this space and become something a little bit different, having my own brand and style of doing things. So when it comes to dating, I have what you call a catch and release method. I encourage men to date other races of women and go to other countries, and also encourage men to all those who feel the need to leave so-called African American women alone and never be bothered with them again, for those who would care to do so. Now, I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I deal with African American women while I'm in this country, but the goal is to one day never ever deal with a so-called African American woman inside the United States of America or even abroad. That doesn't mean that I'm against others of the diaspora. I believe African or Afro-Brazilians are fine because they have a different culture, different socialization. And that goes all over South America, wherever you may find the descendants of slaves at. Also, I think African countries are a great place to look for either serious relationship or even non-serious relationships. But I'm trying to encourage men to say, hey, you like melanated women? Well, you're only dealing with one group here. You got melanated women in Dominican Republic, Panama, all through South America. You got the whole continent of Africa. In fact, Brazil is the largest, has the largest population of Africans outside of Africa, so-called. So there are options, but the socialization here of the American or the African-American female, she's been socialized to have a great disdain for African-American males and African-American male leadership and authority. They call it the patriarchy, or what have you. And again, they have a great disdain for that. And for men who actually want to be involved with women who don't have this adversarial view of relationships, because when you deal with the so-called African-American woman, it's like being in a war zone. So I'm telling brothers, hey, life is short. You don't need to be around here trying to fight with these women to try to get them to do this or get them to do that, or negotiate with them, or, try to come to an agreement with them. Life is too short for that. Travel, go to where you appreciate it for those who can. Now, those who can't, you want to still look for a needle in the haystack, be my guest. But I think our lifetime is too short to be trying to fight with a female over who is the leader of the head or the male in the relationship, so to speak.
Yeah. So you use that term patriarchy. Of course, anyone that understands the Black community at all will know that the Black community has never been a patriarchy.
Exactly.
It's BGS calls it the gynocracy.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, there's a lot of problems with flipping God's order upside down. And so this is tricky. This is tricky because, I mean, I'm married, and I'm married to a Black woman, African American woman, and I'm in my second marriage, and my first one was also an African American woman, and I have said this before, and this seems to be this sort of plight of this so-called educated lame. It has seemed for most of my life, and I mean, it seemed like I had to do a lot of looking to find one that actually liked me. There's like it seems like an uphill battle. It's just the kind of women that I have liked. They didn't dig me. They just didn't dig me. And I was like, what's going on? What's the problem? What's wrong with me?
How tall are
educated.
you?
I'm 6'2".
Okay. That's pretty good for them. But
right.
Maybe you're not thug enough.
Right. Well, no, I'm not. I'm not very thug. I'm educated, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Thunder. I actually have a doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a professor. I'm a music professor at a major university, and there's a bunch of things that it seems that would be indicators of a certain kind of stability that women would want. And so it was always confusing to me why I was having, such a challenge. I mean, I grew up in the country, and my senior year in high school, I transferred to another high school because my family we were the only ones, you know, in that sort of school district. And so for my senior year, I transferred to a school where it was about 40% black. And part of the reason that I transferred was because I wanted to date black girls. I was interested in black girls. And I'll tell you, man, I was in for a rude awakening. You want to talk about nuclear rejection? Why do you talk so proper?
Yeah.
What's wrong with your shoes? You probably bought those pants at Myers. You know, you don't even have a gold chain. You don't have this, you don't have that.
Wow.
What makes you think you can talk to me? I mean, and this was the sort of constant thing. And, and even if I could get a certain kind of attention, where someone would actually not be, well, mostly it was a lot of like, why are you even trying to talk to me? It was mostly that. And I didn't understand it, it didn't make a lot of sense to me. But now I will say that that's not the experience that I've had with all black women. Obviously I'm married. And I suppose all it takes is one. But it seems to me that you shouldn't have to kiss so many frogs.
Yeah.
Before you find the right one.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
Your experience would have been a lot different if you were in another country. You wouldn't have had that problem. You would have been trying to run away from women in other countries. A man like yourself, I know you have a wife, but in the general populace of so-called African-American females, a man like yourself would not be, how can I say it, would not be someone that they would be looking for, because majority of them, not saying 100%, but majority of them, they're looking for a guy with some sort of street swag or edge, some type of dysfunctional lifestyle or something dysfunctional about them. If you're an older man, they still would, want you to dress like you're in your 20s, maybe that might attract them. And all you have to do is look at the men who you see with nice looking women. When you see guys our age with nice looking so-called African-American females, it look like they're just about to go, rob a grocery store. I mean, that's just a general look. Even though these men are our age, they still appear like they are in the streets, probably because they are. And what we don't like to really, how can I say this? What we try to deny, what we don't really want to admit is that so-called African-American females have a love affair with thug culture and thug men. And this is a problem for them because I don't really consider myself part of the collective, because they procreate with guys who are essentially criminals, creating a whole criminal class. Now you have what you see in the urban areas of dysfunction, poverty, crime, and violence. And it's a cycle of it because these women only procreate with the criminal class, with the thugs. And we know that for sure, because I think it's upward to over 50% of black men don't even have children. A lot of them are single.
51%.
51%. So what we see in the so-called African-American community is that these women, they date the same kind of men over and over again. So that's where you get the guy who has
not just that, they're not just that, they're sharing the same guys.
Absolutely. And I was just about to say that. That's where you get the guys with 4 or 5 baby mamas when, over 50% of black men don't have children. So he got 5 baby mamas and 5 kids that none of them are being taken care of by him. And he's in the system in and out. But these are the men that they overwhelmingly choose. And here's the thing. When they find out this guy got 4 or 5 kids by other women that they don't take care of, that doesn't deter them. I remember when I was younger, I was in my teens, early 20s. And it was a dear friend of mine. Her and I used to mess around, but we were just friends. And she was telling me about, she was about to get married to this guy, and she's so excited about it. Was telling me a little bit of his background and history. He had been in and out of jail and has children that he doesn't see. And I said, you know what, sweetheart, do what you do. I'm not trying to, rain on your parade, but if he don't see his children now, and if he's in and out of jail now, that's probably not going to change. She said, no, well, he told me he this and that, blah, 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 blah. Fast forward, they're no longer together. She has 3 children by him. They don't see him. He's in and out of jail. just what I told her that she would get, because for some reason they gravitate toward that energy and they like that exclusively. And when they're older and have a bunch of children, then sometimes they want to change. Sometimes they want to change and say, okay, well, now I want to get a so-called square dude to help me raise, all of Thuggo's children. And for the guys that are wise out there, it's pretty much too late for that. But that's pretty much the default, how can I say it, dating stratagem or mating stratagem of the so-called African-American female. Her goal is to date Johnny Thug all until she's in her mid 40s and then switch up and get a decent guy. But even then, she's not satisfied with that, and she'll most likely cheat on that same guy.
Yeah, well, it's I was listening to there's the up and coming YouTuber. She's got a lot of subscriptions already. It's a white woman. She's 25. Her name's the channel's called Just Pearly Things, and she's kind of she's saying all of the same things you would expect this sort of from a sort of RP sort of perspective, but she's a white woman, and so it's easy for her to get a lot of subscriptions. I mean, you understand how the thing works.
Absolutely.
Okay. And she kind of got her, Donovan Sharp sort of gave her a look, like he did a couple sort of panel discussions with her on his channel, and then that really helped her to sort of start blowing up.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, now I kind of lost my train while I was bringing her up. Okay, she was saying something. She did was a stream earlier today, and one thing that she says pretty frequently is the statistic. So the statistic is that the reason that men are sensitive about body count is because if a woman has had 0 partners when she got married, then there's an 80% chance that the marriage will be successful.
Mm-hmm.
If she has had 5, this is just this is research. This is scientific.
Yeah,
right?
I read that. Mm-hmm.
If she's had 5, then 20% chance of having a successful marriage. 20%. So the reason why it's important to know the history, the dating history, and in this case, the kind of guys that your spouse has been with, is because it gives you an idea of what's coming down the road. Because it's very hard to overcome having a lot of experience, especially when, they did this survey also. Now we know that, it used to be that it was almost always the men that had more sexual experience than the women.
Right.
That's not the case any longer.
Anymore. Nope, not anymore.
Now, yeah, that's right. Now, the average guy has had 6.2 partners, and the average woman 7.
Mm-hmm.
And this just recently, fairly recently, that flipped, so that the bigger number was women. And there's all kinds of reasons why that's problematic.
Yeah.
Just look at, even just from a straight evolutionary biology, procreation, making sure that the offspring are actually yours. Just from a practical perspective, there's all kinds of reasons why it is not the same thing for our women to have the same number of partners as the men. Now, I'm a Christian, and my argument would be that nobody should be having all these partners. That would be my position on this. And in the best case scenario for a lasting marriage, something that works is going to be with both parties having very, very little experience or none. I would argue that the two things that would almost eliminate all of the issues in the black community almost overnight would be abstinence and arranged marriage. Those would be the two things. If we could get en masse, if we could get our community to buy into that, you know, you have community leaders, you have church leaders, you just have, you know, and people are like, you know, and of course this is voluntary. This is voluntary. We're not talking about child brides. But if you could get enough folks to say, hey, what we doing ain't working. We need somebody else needs to make the decision for us. You know, if we could get folks to do that, but of course that's never going to happen. Obviously, it's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. Now I've said a bunch of stuff. What do you think about? You know, you can get in anywhere you want to. What do you think about any of that stuff?
Yeah, the more partners she's had, the less likely she is to pair bond. The less likely she is to pair bond, the more likely she is to cheat on you, and the more likely she is to also leave you. So her body count does matter. Did a video on that many years ago. And I looked at some of the research that you had just mentioned. And yes, fewer bodies means longer marriages. In fact, zero bodies, it's pretty much like 80% marriage rate success. The opposite is, of course, you know, 5+ partners, we're talking about 20%. And, you know, the average woman who in America probably has had 10+ partners conservatively, and many of them 20, 30, 40, 50+. So what happens to her ability to pair bond? Well, it's actually not there. So now she's talking about getting married for any reason except for love. You notice that women don't even talk about love anymore or being in love. It's about the bag. Why? Because they've made themselves into something for sale. So now it's not about love. It's not about raising families. It's not about getting together and building strong communities. It's about her getting the so-called bag now, because there is no love.
So, you know, there's this thing, and, you know, Kevin Samuels recently passed away. Rest in peace to him. And, you know, of course, he was a proponent of marriage, which makes him very unusual, made him unusual for the space.
Yes, definitely.
And he had been married twice and was looking for, quote unquote, his next ex-wife. So he was full of hope for marriage, and actually what he was doing was trying to help women to fix some of the dysfunction so that they could get somebody that would be a good partner for them. See themselves as they actually are, improve the things that they can improve, and then select someone that's actually on their level. That's what he was trying to get to happen. But, you know, of course, you clip him out of context, you can make it look like anything. But he obviously really cared about the women that he was talking to, or else he wouldn't spend time.
He really did. He really did. And the hurtful part, the shameful, well, I wouldn't say hurtful part. The shameful part is that they crucified him anyway.
Of course.
He really wanted to see improvement in the so-called community. Whereas I don't want to see improvement. I want to see separation. He was the one that wanted to see improvement, and actually was a voice of one crying out in the wilderness, but nobody was listening, telling that, you know, African-American women to get themselves together if you want a high-value man. I just simply don't think that your typical so-called African-American woman even deserves a high-value man, or any decent man, or any man, period, because of their history and their attitude. It's not about her genetics. Of course, I get misconstrued with having some type of vitriol or, you know, great disdain for the genetics. My daughter is an African-American woman. My mother was an African-American woman. My sisters are African-American women. So I don't have any disdain for the genetics. The disdain comes from the attitude. But they won't ever admit that, hey, it's our attitude. They want to make it seem like it's something more there, but it's your attitude. And it's
or colorism or something.
exactly, but it's their attitudes and their behavior, their promiscuous behavior and their arrogant attitude. So I'm for separation, but Kevin, most High bless his soul, was really, really for bringing families together. And of course, we know if you build strong families, you build strong communities. You build a strong community, you can build a strong nation. For me, that ship has sailed. I don't have any hope for so-called African Americans. I have no hope for them. I'm kind of more of the late David Carroll's ilk when he said there was no hope or no change for the blacks in mass. Of course, a few pockets, a few people who can do well, but in mass, things have never changed, never will change, and things are actually only getting worse and worse. The youth now are worse than they ever were before. I just saw a story the other day about some teenagers, like 13, 14, beating to death a 72-year-old man, an elder in the community that they were living in, for no reason at all. And they beat him up and he, passed away from his injuries. But this is the type of monsters the BW, the so-called African-American female, has raised. And why do I say it's her fault? Well, again, she has a proclivity and a love for thugs and thuggo. That's what she prefers. She likes the fact that the guy is violent. She likes the fact that he can't pull his pants up. She likes the fact that he's not well groomed. She actually enjoys that. She gets the little tingles in the V because of his dysfunction. So that's who they procreate with. So if you have a woman that loves that lifestyle and are overwhelmingly picking men in that lifestyle, well, what kind of children are they going to raise? Monsters. So now you see the community, it's a direct result of their choices, because we do live in a matriarchy. These are the leaders of the community, whether we want to admit to that or not. The Black female is the leader of the Black community. She sets all of the standards. She calls all of the shots, and everybody else fall in line. Back in the days, to call her Big Mama. This is how, so-called African Americans live. Mama is everything. Even if the father is present, he still plays second role and second fiddle to Mama. So because we live in a so-called matriarchal society, it's the matriarchy's mess that only they can fix, but they will not, because they actually love and enjoy their own dysfunction. And it doesn't necessarily stop when they get older. And when they're older, it's too late. The damage has already been done, but they still have their proclivity and desire to be with the dysfunctional, the thug. They love it.
Now, do you think that education changes that?
No. In my experience, when I was in college, going for my undergrad degree, when I was going to community college, these same women who were in college, they love thuggo too. I know a lot of guys in my community that I grew up in who were not educated men, who were men in and out of jail, and their girlfriends, and in some cases their wives, were professionals, nurses, doctors, attorneys. These women are police officers, all dating the same sort of guys and, wanting to marry them. I worked in a institution for a while, a prison. And would you believe that a lot of the women that worked in this prison as well, they would date the prisoners exclusively because, and I'm not talking about one or two, I'm not talking about isolated incidents. They would overwhelmingly date those guys. And in those situations, it didn't matter if the guy had 2 or 3 girlfriends already there, they want to date him too. So the so-called African-American female has a overwhelming love and desire for thugism. And here's the thing, these women have bachelor's degrees in these prisons, but they overwhelmingly like to date thugs. And I've heard some of the conversations that these women would have amongst each other when they thought nobody else was listening, and how they just lust after the dysfunction. And here's the thing, whatever reason they say they like the thugs, well, you got other correctional officers who lift weights and have dreadlocks and have tattoos, but no, they want someone that's actually in the street and that's dysfunctional, somebody that's actually hurting people in the street, somebody that's actually causing chaos in the community. They have a natural love and proclivity for that. Now, I know people won't be able to take what I'm about to say, but I'm gonna say it anyway because it's representative of who I am and what I believe, my thoughts and my ideas and my philosophy. I actually do believe that the overwhelming majority, not all of them, there are exceptions, but the overwhelming majority of so-called African-American females in America, I believe they're literally, and I mean this, you can call me a quack if you want to, but I believe that they're actually demon possessed, because nothing can explain their behavior other than possession, because a lot of their behaviors aren't even human. Whether it's them going to the so-called, and I hate to be so crude, but I want to say this in a way not to mess with the YouTube algorithm. They go and get the AB, the so-called chop shop, at an alarming rate, more than anybody else in the world. So if we put it all together, let's look at the spiritual aspect of this, right? I believe they're in league with the prince and power of the air. I heard that the Black community will be plus 50 million if it wasn't for the ABs that the so-called African-American female has gotten. In 1 year in New York, there were more ABs than live births. So let's put this together real quick. You have individuals who glorify thug culture and thugism, and they only want to procreate and be in a relationship with so-called thugs that they indeed created. How did they create the thugs? By reproducing with them and actually loving and sponsoring thug culture, getting their babies earrings and tattoos and encouraging them to be dysfunctional, encouraging them to stay away from their fathers, saying that their fathers are not needed and necessary, saying that their fathers are a waste, saying that their fathers are no good. So they're aiding in this dysfunction. They are the ones who created thuggo. I'm gonna say this again. It's the matriarchal so-called African-American female who created thuggo and reproduces with thuggo. So she's creating thuggo because she gives birth to them and she raises them to be thugs. And also she exclusively procreates with them. So that natural proclivity for the thug that she has, plus the ABs, plus the violence and the temperament and the bad behaviors and the twerking and all of the dysfunction that you see that they promote, I don't think we're dealing with just a straight up human being. So that's when I termed them fee-fails and fee-beasts. The fee-fail didn't come from me. It was a guy named Brian Solange who came up with the word fee-fail, but I termed the term fee-beast, because I think you're dealing with something of a beastly type of nature, an abomination, if you will. I'm sorry to say it so crudely again, but I believe we're dealing with an abominable character. Everything that's right in the scriptures, the subject is completely against life, against virtue, against chastity, all of the virtues that we see. And instead it promotes pride, and we know pride is abominable. So when I look at the subject that we're talking about, when I look at the individuals, I see demon possession. I really just don't understand how else we can explain this form of human behavior that we have never seen on the planet. Now, let me make this point one more time. We're dealing with a group of individuals who are about 6% of the population of America, but has over 50% of all of the ABs. I mean, the ones who are supposed to be nurturers are the biggest, I don't want to say it because of the YouTube algorithm, but they're the biggest 187ers. We know what the 187 mean, right? So she's literally has unalived more than white supremacists have. How do we deal with it?
Yeah. The Noit Roba issue, if you can track me backwards there. The Noit Roba issue, shout out to Donovan Sharp for that. He's got a number of those. Let's see here. Isuba, that's one. Let's see here. What's another one? EPAR. He uses that one frequently if you can just track them backwards. So anyhow, but the Noit Roba issue is that's a near and dear to my heart issue. I've done a number of streams on that topic. When I interviewed BGS Ibmore, we talked about that issue, and actually on a subsequent stream, he put in the chat what the actual numbers were. So the numbers, at least at that point, were 671 per 1,000 pregnancies that are terminated in the black community. 671 per 1,000.
Wow.
And I try to, and I'm trying to put this. I don't understand how anyone could, in good conscience, argue in support of something that would have that kind of outcome, that would be doing that kind of mass genocide.
Mm-hmm.
The whole population issue. There's been 20 million of these Noit Robas since Roe v. Wade. And our community has been, outside of a small percentage of thuggos, as you put it, our community is actually very law abiding. We tend to, like, whatever the law says, historically it's been that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so prior to 1973, there were hardly any black females that got a Noit Roba. But quickly after 1973, you started to see increased in numbers, and obviously there was some targeting of our community by Planned Parenthood and some of these other chop shops. Proximity to our community and everything else. Part of my issue, I have some, I have some issues with the black church and the black church's role in not calling certain kinds of behavior out and not making the single biggest issue. 671 per 1,000, and you can't hear any preachers talk about this with any sort of regularity?
Well, you know why, right?
I do know why, but that doesn't seem to be a good enough reason not to, not to discuss this.
Well, let's talk about it. So
go ahead.
So the reason in my mind is because they'll be talking to the choir, literally. They'll be condemning every woman that goes to that church. And we know that overwhelmingly in the black church is female. Every black church that I've ever seen, I'm sure there may be some exceptions, but every church that I've seen, there's always more females than males. And these females, black, so-called African-American church-going females, tend to be extremely liberal. Now, I don't personally understand how that mixes. You would think that because of African Americans and their strong religious views, that they would be more conservative, but it's actually the opposite. They have strong religious views, but they're extremely liberal. And you will find in the black church, most so-called African American females are pro-choice, and they are also extremely liberal in their political views when it comes to everything. So they're pro-choice. They are pretty much against any type of conservative leanings whatsoever. And this has just been the history of the African-American church. So the pastors, in order to keep their core audience intact, their core audience coming back every Sunday, he cannot afford to condemn their actions and behaviors. And if he did so, they may not return on the following Sunday. Then what would happen to his Rolls Royce, his Bentley, or his Cadillac, or what have you? Because these are
his
the
private
ones,
jet.
Exactly. These are the ones who pays his bills. So he will always blame Black men and white supremacy for everything that ills the African-American female, because they need a scapegoat. So he would never bring a mirror and say, hey, honey, it's you, because these pastors 99% of them are not about any type of change. They're about their own bottom line. And reason why we know that, Brother Dr. Thunder, is because if they actually did care about the community, if they actually really believe the gospel that they so-called preach, they would actually condemn the sin that's done by most so-called African-American females, which is the AB and promiscuity. But you can't condemn that. You can't. So they adopt very, very liberal ideologies. People forget that divorce is wrong in the scriptures. But how is it that you can go to a church, right? African-American female, she can meet an African-American male in the church, and they can get married by the pastor in that church, and then get a divorce, and that same pastor will remarry that African-American female years later in the same church. Well, in the scripture, they call that adultery. But you see how their liberal views and leanings dictate doctrine and church policy, not the scriptures. So the same thing with thinking that the African-American church can do anything about the conditions that you see. The African-American church is one of the reasons, I'm gonna say this again, the African-American church is one of the reasons why we see the dysfunction in the communities. We see African-American communities in one or two ways. They're either being predatory against each other or being preyed upon by others. And one of those people who prey, or institutions that prey upon African Americans, are the churches for monetary gain. Other institutions, like, you got your liquor stores, and you got, the peddlers of things that you shouldn't put in your body. So we have all this exploitation, and that's all the so-called African American community is. They're either predators to each other or being preyed upon by outside forces and even inside forces. And that's pretty much what it is. And I don't think that will ever, ever change. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I don't think that would ever change. It's disheartening.
Yeah, it is. It is disheartening. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to certain sort of tropes, stereotypes about black preachers and about churches. One church in particular that comes to mind is Geno Jennings' church in Philadelphia, where he is clearly not afraid to call out anyone and everyone's bogus behavior.
That's true.
And what's interesting is his church is packed full of men and women. It's
and his church is exceptional.
Yeah. And the thing, and so when I think about this, and I know I've got a number of ministers and pastor friends, and at times we've had conversations about these issues, and a couple of them have been unaware of the issues. I brought up something about the underrepresentation of black men in black church. And they were like, really? Oh, I don't, which just made me think that they were either playing dumb or they just hadn't been around for very long. But I knew that wasn't the case based on their age. But most are aware that there's an issue. But I think there is an apprehension of fear to speak out with assertiveness about, certain issues. And I think that part of what it is that you said is totally the case. I mean, if you're condemning the people that are sitting in the seats, they may not want to come back. And then what do you got? And there is the issue of, you do have to sort of serve the people that are sitting in the seats. Right? So there is that issue, and then you can get into this sort of pastoral thing, and you don't want to just scare everybody away before you got it. Okay, so it gets muddy, it gets gray area and everything else, and gets challenging and gets human and everything else. I don't think you have to be a POS to be playing into that whole scenario. You could actually be very well-meaning, but still be susceptible to I think what a lot of these ministers I think are susceptible to. But I'll say this too. Like I said, there is a number of exceptions to this. If I want to see more highlighting of these exceptions, I want to see more folks talking about these exceptions, because if enough of these ministers knew that, hey, I guess it's okay to call stuff out as it is, because look, you can be successful if you stand your ground. Now, it might not happen overnight, and you might not get rich doing that, but you can actually grow your ministry. You can actually grow your church, because there's a lot of men. The reason that they're not there is because they want to hear some straight talk.
Yeah.
Men want to hear straight talk. They don't want to hear this, this stuff, and it's all eloquent, and you hitting all the points and all that. That's great. That's great. I mean, you're a great orator. That's great. Great. But men need to hear straight talk. And it's been a long time since men have, with regularity, from the pulpit of the black church, gotten that kind of straight talk.
But I think most ministers got the memo. They see how successful certain pastors are who speak exclusively to women and women's issues, and how they became millionaires for that. And I think they understand that well. So when you hear your most church messages, it's geared toward women, period. So I think most men stay away from churches because it is a place that's centered on femininity. I even had a woman told me herself that, and a person who was very active in a very popular church in Chicago, she said, hey, she realized that church is exclusively for women. And that's something I had been mentioning to her for many years, but she came to that conclusion, I guess, just by seeing so many different things to the point where you couldn't deny it. And, if, not saying that every church is like that, but if you are not a bent wrist male, then I don't think you would want to really hear a female message. And that's just the point. That's just not a place where men, straight men anyway, feel comfortable being around, you know what I mean? Because it's a very good place, very feminine.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it. And I hate to say it, and a lot of guys that go there, not every one of them, but a lot of guys will go there quite on the soft side as well. So, guys see that and say, nah, we're going to stay away from, those places. I mean, that's just growing up, I did attend church growing up, and primarily on my own, but it became more and more of a place of alienation for me than a place that I wanted to be. So I had gone to church for many, many years, and then I stepped away from the church. And many, many reasons, because of my doctrinal differences with the church, dogma, but also because it was a place full of feminine energy. Every time I've gone to church as a young man, I felt out of place, and I was made to feel out of place because I didn't have that feminine energy. I didn't want to dance and shake something, while the music was playing. I don't want to gyrate my body. I didn't need to scream and holler to let people know I'm having a good experience. I didn't need what they call, women would tell me to go there for an emotional release. I didn't need that. Men like discipline, guidance, and direction, strength, and power. And that's what we resonate with, not, running around, dancing, singing, jumping and pumping, hopping and popping and sweating and hearing music all day. That's just not what most men are comfortable with. We want to hear straight talk, a straight message. And that's why people like Pastor Gino, because it is more of a masculine message. It's centered upon masculinity. The reason why a lot of guys have joined the Nation of Islam instead of church, because there is a lot of masculine energy. We don't want to be around that feminine energy. And the church, by and part, understands that you can become rich by having an effeminate pastor who caters to women. And all the effeminate looking or acting or sounding pastors, all of them are extremely successful for their message tailored exclusively to the so-called African-American female. So the church is indeed a part of the problem. I did a video called Church Creates HOs, and I really believe that. And I can prove that. Of course, we don't have time to go into that here. But yeah, the church is part of the problem, in my opinion.
Well, there's that. Yeah, well, there's the whole, greasy grace, right? So do whatever you're going to do and come back to us and we'll forgive you.
Mm-hmm.
There is that, and that's not good for anyone, right? It certainly is not good for, our women. So I'm Orthodox. I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I didn't grow up that way.
So when you say Orthodox, you're speaking of like the Orthodox Church, like what you would see in parts of Europe, like the Orthodox Church. Oh, okay. You're the first brother I've ever heard that said he was an Orthodox Christian. That's different. That's very different. I don't know if people pick up on that, but that's not common. In fact,
no, it's not.
In America, Orthodox Christianity is somewhat frowned upon. I know in Russia they have a great affection for Orthodoxy, and a few other places in Europe, but that's mainly Western European, not so much American. In fact, I can't even think of. I'm sure there are some, but I'm sure there's very few Orthodox churches in America. Very few. I mean, what rules is Catholicism. And then of course,
well, there's actually quite a few Orthodox churches in America.
Really? I didn't know that.
So the Greek Orthodox Church, that's a church that's very common.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the OCF Orthodox, OCA Orthodox Church of America, which is sort of a cousin church to the Russian Orthodox Church. You have a number of there's Serbian Orthodox churches and there's Ethiopian Orthodox churches. There's a number of Orthodox churches that are in the Americas. Also, one that is pretty prevalent in America is the Antiochian Orthodox churches.
I didn't know that.
Now, still very minority of churches that exist in America
compared to Catholicism, Protestantism.
Okay.
Yeah,
right. Very much so. But the reason that I went Orthodox is, there's a number of reasons. So I became very interested in apologetics, Christian apologetics. When I was, I started getting really interested in that when I was 19, 20, 21, and in college. And so I started checking out a lot of the evangelical stuff because there's a lot of kind of evangelical apologetic stuff, and the Catholics are also big into the apologetics. So Josh McDowell, and then there's a guy named William Lane Craig.
I'm familiar with
William
him.
Lane Craig. Yeah, and then Ravi Zacharias, who recently passed away, and then a huge scandal broke out because he actually was doing a bunch of stuff he shouldn't have been doing, but still the information was still great information. And then through Ravi Zacharias, I found out about G.K. Chesterton, Malcolm Muggeridge, and of course C.S. Lewis.
Yes, I'm familiar with C.S.
So, and in my reading of that, a lot of that material, it caused me to have more questions about historical continuity. One of the questions that always arose was, why are there like 30,000 Protestant denominations? It seems that the Bible is pretty clear.
I think it's about 45,000. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I've been saying 30,000 for a long time, so it probably is 45,000 now. Yeah. So why is that the thing? Because it seems that the Bible is pretty explicit about divisions. And what is the church? What did the people that were sitting around the table when they were deciding which books were going to go in and which ones would not go in, what did they think the church was? So I started asking these kind of questions. And when I was in college, I took a class. It was a Christian tradition class. And basically it just went through the history of Christianity. And it was taught by a a cussing former Catholic priest, which was a rather interesting experience. But super knowledgeable guy, and he talked about the Orthodox Church, but it kind of went in one ear and out the other ear. You know, the Great Schism, 1054, which is when the Roman Catholic Church, primarily over a different interpretation idea of what the papacy was.
It was you're mentioning an ecumenical council in 1054. I think that was the council of was it Constantinople? I think you mentioned one of the ecumenical councils that happened throughout the centuries. Of course, be the first one, the Council of Nicaea in 325, but they had several ecumenical councils after that. I think
there were 7 great councils.
Yeah, 7 great councils. I think that was one of the last ones, 1054.
Well, so what happened was, and this actually was a development over probably a couple hundred years. So you had issues with language. There were 5 patriarchates. Okay, so you had the Roman Church was one of the patriarchates, one of the 5. It was the largest jurisdiction, but it was only one of the 5. And in order for something to carry, all 5 had to be in agreement. And that's what the importance of those councils was. It was to keep the church one. But what the Catholic Church started to do is they started to interpret the Bishop of Rome, also called the Pope. They started to interpret that because it was the largest jurisdiction, that he was, quote unquote, first among equals.
Yeah, infallible as well.
Yeah, first among equals.
Yeah.
And so then they started to say, well, we can just unilaterally, we can just make changes, we can do whatever we want to. And so they started making some adjustments and changes to certain things. And when the other 4 churches were like, these are not things that we signed off on, this isn't right. So then the Pope was excommunicated. And so that created the Great Schism, 1054. So I dated a girl when I was in high school that was Catholic, and I used to go to church with her. And I knew that there was aspects of the Catholic thing that wasn't really, there was issues that I had with that. But I always had a certain drawing sense to this idea that there could be an unbroken apostolic succession. That there literally could be a sort of like a master-apprentice relationship between Jesus, his disciples, the apostles, and then they had, through an unbroken connection of ordination and succession, to a priest or a bishop that you could actually go and talk to. Now, that there's something that was powerful to me about that, because of how much you can lose when you don't have historical continuity, right? And when I started asking certain questions about the Bible, you know, where did the Bible come from? This kind of thing. And the kinds of churches that I was attending, they just couldn't answer the question.
Yeah, and they
just didn't know.
Yeah, and that's very problematic, because if you claim to live your life by a book and you don't know the origin. If I say, hey, have you ever heard of the Septuagint? Do you know what it means when you say the Masoretic text? What is Textus Receptus? If you don't know those terms, while you're reading the book, you know nothing of the history about. To me, that's problematic. That's right. And
absolutely,
as when I was in the church, they didn't have those answers either. And I realized it was more of a social organization than it was a religious one. If I say the term theology proper, and if I ask a pastor or parishioners, hey, what is your church stance on theology proper? They wouldn't know what the hell I was talking about. I'm like, oh, okay, so I see you can't even really talk about any real biblical issues here, because it's more of a social circle than anything else. And most people who I've encountered, in my experience, know nothing about scriptures, know nothing about biblical history, events, church councils, church fathers, none of those things. All those things are completely unknown by them. and in their estimation probably will be irrelevant as well. So they are in places that they don't know anything about. And I was just never built that way. There were there was questions I needed answers to that they couldn't give, so I had to go and search other places. And from there, my own research, I realized that my particular theology didn't match with Christian theology, so I could no longer call myself a Christian because I'm a strict monotheist, and I actually deny the existence of a Trinity. I believe God is one person, so that knocks me out of the box of any church. But the funny thing is, most so-called African American people, if I mention it, they don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I just find that funny.
Right. So, and this is interesting because, I mean, there's actually a number of black churches actually that are not Trinitarian.
That's surprising.
Apostolics.
Yeah. Are they oneness? Because that's, in my opinion, oneness, Pentecostalism, or modalism is kind of a cousin to Trinitarianism. Like, for instance, right. T.D. Jakes just traditionally a oneness Pentecostalism, or a what we call a oneness preacher.
Right.
Yeah. So to me, that's kind of Trinity light.
Yeah.
I understand.
Well,
I understand. But I'm
you
strictly monotheist. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they you know, they don't want you singing the hymn "Holy, Holy, Holy."
Oh,
in those churches.
Oh.
But anyhow, God in three persons, blessed
right.
Trinity. Okay, yeah, they don't want that.
Athanasian Creed, right?
Yeah. So, but the thing about the Orthodox thing that really was the answer for me, and as I get older, and how important the whole masculinity thing is to me. I have a son. I've got an 8-year-old. And why that isn't important, what other aspects of why it's become more important. So in the Orthodox Church, they are not messing around with, so the womanist thing has had a pretty profound impact on Protestant churches in particular.
Absolutely.
And the Orthodox Church, there's certain roles for certain people, and that's just what it is. It's always been that way. It's never going to change. So bishops and priests are always going to be men. All of the people that go behind where they're preparing the Eucharist, they're all men. Mm-hmm. That's just what it is. It and it's what it's going to be. And there's no sort of upheaval or squabbling or fighting over who gets to be back there. It's not that thing. And if you think about it, only second to Jesus is reverenced Mary, his mother. Mm-hmm. So it's not like it's some sort of misogyny. Mm. It's not that. It's just there's a particular role and a place.
Yes, an order
for everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's an order. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of order, there is an order for protection. One of the things that I hear certain folks in our community complaining about is that they're not being protected. Mm-hmm. But there is a context for protection. So God over men, man over his wife, wife over children, right? And that is the vertical order for protection. So the man is commanded to give up his life, to be willing to sacrifice himself for his wife, right? The only thing that he requires in return, because you cannot protect someone that will not submit.
Exactly.
It's not possible. So like I said, I have an 8-year-old son. Okay. And we go to the gym. Yeah, I take him to the gym with me, and I take him everywhere. He's with me all the time. And say we're walking on the sidewalk, next to the street or whatever. And I tell him, don't go on the street. Stay on the sidewalk. Stay on the other side of me. I don't need you close to the street. You need to stay over there. Okay? Now, if I can't get him to do that, and something happens to him, look, I mean, what am I supposed to do?
Exactly.
What am I supposed to do? I mean, I don't have mind control. I can't, and I'm not going to jump out in the middle. I can't stop the bus. What am I supposed to do? All I can do is say, look, this is the situation. It makes the most sense for you to be over here.
Right.
Because that's out of where the danger is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're unwilling to comply with that, I can't protect you. I don't have the ability to protect you.
Not possible. Nope. It is not possible.
And so it seems strange to me and out of place to be complaining about not being protected when there seems to be a particular kind of disposition and attitude with respect to the terrible word submission or even worse, maybe obey.
Oh yeah. Terrible words. Yep. Terrible words there are certain groups who they just do not want to hear such a thing. They just do not. Terrible words, even though that's the order. And the thing is, a lot of these detractors from such a term called submission are churchgoers. And that's the thing about modern Christianity. You can make it whatever you want or whatever you want it to be. You don't have to listen to your husband. You can divorce and remarry. You can do whatever you want to do in modern Christianity. Doesn't mean anything. There's no rules. There's nothing you have to follow. All laws are null and void. You can do whatever you want to do. No rules. Just come as you are, stay as you are, and be who you are. And that's it. As long as you keep tithing and keep hitting that offering plate, anything goes. It's an amazing place. So there is no change, in my opinion, coming out of the church or either other religious institutions. I think we're far gone from that. I mean, you had your Martin Luther Kings, you had your Malcolm X's, and the likes of those. Every religious movement, every political movement, every economic movement has just been, or come to naught, I should say. And I don't like to be so cryptic, but I have to say that Mr. David Carroll was right when he said there's no hope and no change for the so-called African American. And I wish it wasn't so. I would like nothing better than for us to be thriving in clean, safe neighborhoods with excellent schools, intact families, and melanated men and melanated women together. I would love that. And shout out to Mark Sims, who that's his phrase, clean, safe neighborhoods with excellent schools. However, I have to be practical in my approach and realize that such a day is far from likely to happen. I do tell guys that they should date other races of women because at the end of the day, you're a man first and you want peace. And as hard as it is to be a man in society, as much as you have to fight, the last thing you want to have to do is come home and fight with your woman. It's the last thing you want to do. The last thing you want to be doing is being challenged by your woman on your manhood. So for the guys who want peace, and I'm not saying it's a solution for everybody, but for guys who want peace and you want a woman, and of those 51% of men who are unmarried and don't have children, dating outside of your community is a better option, and even better option than that, dating outside of America is an even better option. Because I'm sure of those 51% of men who don't have children or girlfriends or wives, I'm sure many of them will like to. And I know we can't get them all together and have one message for them. But if any one of those men run across my information, I'm telling them, nah, don't waste your time searching for that needle in the haystack, which is the African-American female that might be somewhat decent. And even if she is somewhat decent, you have to understand that she's still going to be a product of the culture that she's in. So it's still going to be problems there. But if you want peace of mind, I think it's best to go foreign. That's the only solution I can think of. I've come to the point, Dr. Thunder, although I have a heart for our people, I am a nationalist at heart. and patriarchal at heart. Shout out to the last Crucible. However, I understand our situation and our plight is one of failure. And you only have so much life to live, to where I have to just say, you know what, I have to respectfully just bow out and say, no, you all can have that. I hate to be that way, but you only have so much life. And we're talking about someone who was involved in churches. Listen, Dr. Thunder, there's a point in my life where I used to sell final call newspapers. There was a point in my life when I was at the Baptist church protesting and marching against injustice in my neighborhood. I'm literally hot summer day, Baptist church, on my own free will and volition, carrying signs downtown Chicago, talking about injustices. I was that guy for a little while as a late teen, and young adult. I was that guy. But then when I looked around, I said, oh, you know what? None of this means anything to the people that I'm fighting for. In fact, I was ridiculed for, at one point in time in my life, selling final call newspapers, and at one time in my life, protesting downtown on behalf of a Baptist church. And I just realized that, hey, not only is it not appreciated, I'm actually considered a terrible person or a lame or a weak person for even caring. And how can you fight against that? I just decided, no, enough was enough for me. But I'm not saying everybody else had to come to that conclusion. That was just how I got to be where I am, to where I don't think there's much hope or change. And one thing that we know with Dr. Thunder is that the foundation of everything is man, woman, and then child. So if that's off base, off kilter, off track, if that foundation is broken, you can't build anything on top of that. So when I'm saying to Black men to go foreign and date out, I'm in essence telling them to not care about the community and let it fold, because we know that the family structure is the basis of everything when it comes to our civilization. And I'm just of the opinion now, just my opinion, that for us, it's pretty much a done deal. Stick a fork in it.
So what is the difference in, okay, so I can imagine somebody listening to our conversation and just being like, man, this is this guy hates women, or he hates Black women, or how can you say these things, and in my mind, not in my mind, how is what it is that you're saying different from, say, for instance, divestors?
Actually, it's not much different at all. I actually agree with the divestors. I think that African-American females should go after white males and other races of men. I think that if two people aren't getting along, they should be separated. So believe it or not, the divestors, I'm on board with that. I believe that so-called African-American women, since they don't respect Black men, since they don't love Black men, they shouldn't be bothered with Black men. And a lot of them, if they had the choice, wouldn't want to be with Black men. They're with Black men by default, because in mass, other races of men don't want to be bothered with them. It seems like that might be changing. I'm starting to see more and more so-called African-American females date other races of men. And I say, good. I think that you should go to men that you can respect and appreciate, because you obviously don't respect and appreciate us as Black men unless we're thugs. See, that's the thing. She only likes you if you're a thug. So she likes two types of men: non-melanated men and thugs. The average good guy, they're gonna look right past. When a guy like you, Dr. Thunder, I know you're married and everything, but a guy like you with your resume, with what you have to offer, you would think that women would be throwing themselves at you a mile a minute. And guess what? If they had any sense, they would. If they had any sense about what it means to raise a family, what it is to be a righteous person or a righteous citizen, or anybody that is of a certain amount of respect, class, and intelligence, they would be throwing themselves at you. But since they're not of that ilk, they are of the ilk of, let's go to the dysfunctional men and procreate with them, then yeah, finding a wife probably was difficult, and you had to, get more than one to have those experiences to get to the one that you have now, because a man like you isn't appreciated. So since a man like you isn't appreciated, and other men like you won't be appreciated. You were, blessed to be able to find you an African American wife, but most of us don't have that kind of energy, that kind of time. So we should go away and deal with other women, just like I think Black women should go and be with European men or whatever men if they want to, because it's obvious they only respect Black men if they're thugs.
Now, but there's an added aspect of the divester thing, though, and this is the hate part, because you have divestors, folks like Cynthia G, who has actually called for multiple occasions selective termination of pregnancies if you find out that it's a boy.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And or you have divestors that are describing how excited and turned on they become when they see Black men being manhandled by white police.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Or using neo-Nazi talking points to describe Black men with regularity. So my question to you, now I don't see it the same. The so-called SYSBM and divestors, I don't see it the same exactly, because SYSBM is not calling for selective termination
of not at all.
Infant
not
females.
No, no.
And SYSBM is not using neo-Nazi talking points while describing Black women.
Yeah. I'm not specifically SYSBM, but I am very familiar with the ideology that comes from bus driver X. My similarities with the divestors probably end at dating out. I'm definitely not calling for any type of violence, but I am calling for Black men to not protect so-called Black women. If they're not yours, they're not your obligation to protect. So unless it's your wife or your family member, I don't think that us as Black men should waste our life on protecting a group of women who has no respect for you whatsoever and wouldn't even see you as a possible mate at all. Not that that's the most important thing, but if they rather destroy their own communities and their own bodies by having the ABs and procreating with Thuggo, then let them have it. So I'm calling for not termination, but indifference and hands off. Only protect what you own and control. And since your communities are far from that, I say let the so-called AA female defend herself, leave her to her own. And it doesn't, I'm not proud of this, Dr. Thunder. It's a result of the times that we live in. I'm not proud of this. If this was the 30s, 40s, or 50s, it would be different. But I'm sorry, if I walk down the street and I see so-called AA female having some issues with someone, I'm gonna keep walking. I'm gonna keep walking. I believe my life is too valuable to try to defend her life with mine. I don't think that my life is disposable, especially not for a group of individuals who claim that they're strong and independent and don't need you. So I would not recommend, advise, or advocate men protect the AA female. I wouldn't. That's just my own personal thing. Any man who feel like he should, any man who feel like he should, that's his business. I'm not mad at you. Yeah. All I got to say is that if you get what's coming to you off of that, I can't feel sorry for you. I can't cry at your funeral, because if it's
so there's a practical thing in there. So, and this would be with anyone, right? If I take a certain kind of risk to protect someone and it goes wrong and something happens to me, then now I am not available to protect my family.
Absolutely.
To be present to help take care of my parents when they get to the point when they really need me to be around.
Let me pose a question to you. not to cut you off, but in light of what you're saying, that was a young African-American female who was unalived by her boyfriend / baby daddy in New York as she was pushing her daughter home in a stroller. And this guy was a known criminal and thug. So here's my thing, because some people may have a dilemma on whether they should protect a female. So if you walk past and saw this happening, you would essentially be saying, forget your son and your wife and your parents and everyone that loves you, and you are becoming a responsible and a victim of this particular young African-American female's poor choices in men, a man that she chose to deal with. So you're saying, if you're going to protect her, that your life is disposable and your life could be used as a mop to shield and protect and clean up the mess of a decision she's made with her own life, in a decision that she will surely make again once you're gone and buried and the man that she decided to procreate with is gone and buried as well. All I'm saying, Dr. Thunder, is that my life is not disposable in that manner.
I understand that. Now, what if somebody is to throw a monkey wrench in and say, but what about grace? What about compassion? What about mercy?
Mm-hmm. I would say those are terms for the Most High characteristics, not mine. Because my life has value to me, and I'm not going to take my life to show grace and mercy to someone who has chosen to put themselves in certain situations. Because men, oftentimes, we look at our lives as nothing, invaluable, a life that is disposable, and a life that should be sacrificed for any and everybody. Our lives are so cheap, especially so-called African-American men. Our lives are so cheap to us because we're so used to seeing it lost and seeing it squandered. But I'm here today to say, no, my life has value to myself and those who love me. And my life is not going to be taken for granted. My life is not going to be used to be disposed of to protect an African-American female and her poor choices because of the psychosis and the demonic possession that she's under. I'm saying no. I'm saying I'm too valuable for that. And I'm saying, as a man, go where you're celebrated. Go and deal with those other women. And don't offer your provision and protection to someone who you don't own, control, and is not subjugated under you in every real possible way. That's just the message that I have. Now, I understand that, most men may not feel like that. African-American males, even the white, not saying you per se, but the whitest and brightest among us still look at their lives as being disposable. And I just disagree for myself. My life is not disposable. And to be squandered.
I've sort of a version of this thought process that you have. Mm-hmm. I have more or less adopted when I consider, and this is going to sound terrible to people, but giving money to homeless people. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in my mind, my money, my resources is primarily to be used to take care of my family. Mm-hmm. And so if I am, even if it's, and I'll be honest, I still, every once in a while, I'll have a little change and I'll do something. Yeah. But if I'm doing this beyond a certain point, I potentially can make myself less effective in my primary role. Mm-hmm. And it creates a challenge, maybe a sort of a tension between perhaps wanting to do good for someone else, to help someone that needs assistance, if I know their scenario or not, and fully being responsible for what I've been given charge over. And so it creates a kind of there's a figuring out exactly where that line is, where you're going to be, and sort of navigate. that's more or less how I hear what it is that you're saying, with respect to the value of your own life, and not being willing to sacrifice that in order to basically cover up a mistake that could have been avoided by somebody else. A series of mistakes that could have been avoided. Maybe not just one mistake. Yeah. So, yeah, man. I appreciate your time and energy. I think we've had a great conversation.
Absolutely.
I'd love to talk to you again sometime soon. All right. Now you have a good one. God bless you.
You too. Absolutely. Talk to you soon, brother.
Peace.
All right. Peace.